huge numbers of young people are unable to afford their own homes, and so they don't feel as though there is a stake in society to be had.
Amongst those under the age of 34, the Reform Party does better than the Conservatives.
So it might be taking home 40% of what you earn. And if you take in what rent is in London, who's building any capital?
The government often frames things against the G7. The G7 is sort of a club of other Western declining economies. The pace car for our economy is the G20.
Member of Parliament for Windsor since 2024. He had a career in the energy industry before he entered Parliament. We have Reem Ibrahim, the IEA's acting Director of Communications, and indeed a genuine young person.
That's a bit harsh.
The reason the IEA currently has an acting director, he remains an IEA policy fellow, but his day job these days is as country manager for Freshwater Strategy. Brings a bit of polling and political strategy as well as policy expertise to the discussion. But speaking first, we have Andrew Griffith, the MP for Arundel and South Downs. He had a fantastic commercial career with Sky before he became a politician. He was the number 10 Director of Policy. He was the City Minister, and he was in Cabinet as Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, a portfolio which he is currently shadowing. Andrew, without further ado, why don't we start with you with your 5 minutes?
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the most important topic that we are going to discuss here. Even more important, sorry Kemi, I'm supporting Kemi, but even more important than our leadership is actually how do we pivot our set of policies to appeal to a new generation. We probably all know the reason you're here. You know the stats about the average age at which people start to shift from supporting other parties to the Conservative Party. And it shouldn't go without remarking that among particular younger cohorts, reform is attracting a similar level of support to the Conservatives. So we have a big job of work to do. But we are also Conservatives. And so we do not articulate things entirely in terms of sectional interests. What we need to do is cogent a policy offering that appeals both to existing supporters but broadens that out to those who are new. As Kemi says, we can't become the party for those who have things. It has to be more about our values. And although there are around 27 million people, so a really big, large, outsized opportunity in their 30s and 40s and early 50s, we can debate young, but that's a very big cohort amongst which the Conservatives are no longer getting support. It's never been out of fashion, the belief that the state should be our servant, not our master, that if people work hard, play by the rules, they should have the ability to look after themselves and their family through that process of acquiring wealth and through getting security. It's also the case that many of the agendas that we should be talking about on other platforms speak particularly to how people get employment, how we create a growing economy, how they can aspire to have a family, and yes, as part of that, aspire to own their own home, but also go through a period potentially of renting a property and doing so on a fair basis, without some of the headwinds that we have seen through uncontrolled, unlimited immigration. And if we want to look at a successful political success story, because that's ultimately what we are here to do, is to minimise the damage that this government does and maximise our probability of returning to government in 4 or 4.5 years' time, I would suggest looking at the success of the Canadian Conservatives, who very successfully, Pierre Poilievre has very successfully made that link, which we had not at the last election, between large uncontrolled immigration and the prospects of young people, whether that is to buy a property or to go through successfully that period of rental. There are some statistics that say in London, the private rental market, 2/3 of the participants of that, this is just a fact, not a value statement, 2/3 of the participants are headed by a foreign-born member of the household. Now, that could be for lots of reasons. It could be for very successful people coming over here and seeking to invest in our economy and provide prosperity. But that, as well as the housing supply, as well as reforming an NHS, which again is pushing young people into private GPs by default. The largest users of private GPs in urban areas are young because our National Health Service is simply not configured to the demands of a population that have grown up with the expectations of an app for everything and are living busy and contented lives. I don't know how we're doing for time, Tom.
Good, don't worry.
But these are really important agendas. And so my key points are, we shouldn't treat this as sectional. The easy dopamine win that the Conservative Party must not go for is to somehow criticise those of elderly generations who are supporting us. But we absolutely have a fundamental job to do to reconnect what are not niche beliefs, that are fundamental, the facts of life, as Mrs. Thatcher said, the facts of life are conservative. Regularly, when young people are polled, their aspirations remain identical to the aspirations of young people growing up in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s and 1990s. They want security, they want a home, they want a good job, and they want public services that work for them whilst being able to retain as much as possible of the fruits of their own labour.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you very much for joining us all today, this afternoon. I am a genuine young person. I am Gen Z, and I don't normally reveal my age too much, but I am 22. And so actually, when it comes to those kind of perspectives around various different intergenerational inequality elements, there definitely is very, very clearly a divide, and I can see that firsthand. But I'm also an anomaly in my generation. The majority of Gen Zers, the majority of young people, do not believe in free market ideas. They do not believe that there is to have a stake in society. And that is fundamentally a problem with the economy. So I know we're probably going to talk a lot about housing on this panel, so I don't want to touch on it too much. But I do just want to say a couple of different points regarding housing. We all know that there is a housing crisis. We all know that we do not build enough homes, and we all know that it's economics 101. If we are to increase the supply of housing, then houses will become more affordable for this generation. Now, in order for there to be conservative voters, in order for there to be effectively people that feel as though there is a stake in society, and Andrew spoke about that kind of generational shift where effectively as you get older, you feel as though you have a stake in society, you might start to have a family, you sort of get onto the property ladder, and you feel as though you've got a stake in society, and so there is something to conserve. We don't have that for young people anymore. And fundamentally, it's a problem with the planning system. It's a problem with the fact that the government effectively actively restrict the housing supply. Now, Andrew also spoke about this kind of short-termism. We saw over the last year, especially, I think, in the lead up to the general election in July, the government effectively giving up on young people and in the short term, trying to effectively bring back those older voters. Now, pensioners, I know we probably have a couple of pensioners in this room. Pensioners are much more likely to turn up at the ballot box than any other demographic by age. And of course, pensioners are much more likely to then vote Conservative. So if you're sort of faced with effectively election defeat, what are you going to do? You're going to do everything you can to ensure that those pensioners end up voting Conservative. So we had the national minimum service levels. I mean, absolutely ludicrous idea. You ended up having the triple lock plus. So we already spend double the entire the entire budget of the Ministry of Defence on pensions alone. And yet we're going to spend even more as a result of what Sunak wanted to do. And then we had this generational tobacco ban. Now, anyone that follows me on Twitter or X knows that I was very, very upset about the generational ban. It's effectively infantilising young people and telling them that the government knows better. So not only is there this housing issue, which in the long term must be solved, but in the short term, the government have been chasing those kind of short-term votes. And again, in the long term, that means that those particular people will never feel as though there is that stake in society to be had. And just on my last point, worklessness in the UK is increasingly becoming such a huge problem. So we've got almost 3 million people on long-term sickness benefits. That is absurd. That is absolutely astronomical. And many of those people are young. A lot of people are coming out of university education or indeed coming out of school and claiming long-term sickness benefits as a result of the government's more relaxed rules post-COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of it is mental health. All of it is claims that this mental health means that they are unable to work. And so what we have at the moment is a generation where huge numbers of young people are unable to afford their own homes, and so they don't feel as though there is a stake in society to be had. They are being infantilized by the government and being told that they can and cannot do things with their own bodies that adults across previous generations have been allowed to do. And fundamentally, they're not able to do those things and decide their own economic destiny. So ultimately, I think that in conclusion, we need the government to take a step back, but we also need to recognise that the future of these generations and the future of young people is really what's going to matter ultimately for all parties, but of course, indeed for the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much. Feeling a bit like the guy who's like the Hotel California to me, so I can check out any time I like, but I can never actually leave. No, it's excellent to be back here, and it's great to see a full room on an early Sunday afternoon. So quite a lot of commitment from everyone here. I'm thinking about this topic. The first thing that came to my mind was the question of what would Alex P. Keaton do? For those unfamiliar with that cultural reference from the 1980s, Alex P. Keaton was played by Michael J. Fox in what was Ronald Reagan's favourite TV show called Family Ties. Alex was this young, ambitious conservative who went around school in a three-piece suit in active rebellion to his hippie parents from the 60s, showing how one generation always rejects the previous one. I think there's a lot of concern today about young people never potentially voting conservative. There's this narrative that young people today are different and they're not going to change their views. And that possibly will be the case, but that's nothing certain about that. We're probably likely on that path at the moment, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So I'm going to try to paint, I suppose, a little bit more optimistic message about something that the Conservative Party could achieve if it can get its things in order, its worldview and messaging in order. And the first point to make here, which is things are astronomically bad for the Conservative Party when it comes to young people. I mean, in 2019, the average age in which somebody was more likely to vote Conservative than Labour was 39. In 2024, it was 65. The Conservative Party has the issue of literally its members and as well as its voters slowly dying out. And if it can't attract more young people to vote for it, it won't be a particularly significant party. And as already been pointed out once on this panel already, amongst those under the age of 34, the Reform Party does better than the Conservatives. And among 16 to 17-year-olds, a quarter of, at least according to one poll that looked into this, a quarter of that demographic votes would be opt to vote Reform, and just 5% for the Tories. And of course, the Green Party does very well there, and Labour does even better. So what do we think's driving this? So I'm going to talk about three different things. The first one is genuine frustrations. I think you are seeing the kind of rebellion against the mainstream parties amongst this younger demographic. That's why you see what I would argue, but you could argue, the kind of the more populist claims of the left and the right. And they don't feel like mainstream parties are speaking to them. They're not interested or entertained. Maybe there's a bit of a meme effect there, a bit of a TikTok effect. That's the first part of it. This genuine kind of populism is not just something that would perceive to be of older demographics. Young people are not kind of centrists in a meaningful sense, and they're being pulled out to other sides. The second part here, I think, is economics, and not to be Marxist here, but I think there are material drivers of what is going on with young people. I think a lot of young people have been sold a story that turned out to be a lie, which was you work hard at school, you get into best possible university you can, you then get a decent professional job. Within a few years, you should be on your way to the housing ladder and starting a family. I think for a lot of young people, that story isn't true. It's certainly not true if you don't have parental money to support you to get onto the housing ladder, and that's delaying the facts of life that you might be considered to be conservative. Freshwater did a poll a few years ago kind of investigating these issues and these intergenerational issues. I think the results here were quite interesting, which were a big difference in terms of the younger cohorts not believing that working hard will get you ahead. Just 40% of people 18 to 34 believe working hard will get you ahead, compared to 57% for those age over 55. So the younger generation doesn't feel like they're getting rewarded for their efforts. They also don't think they're going to be better off than their parents. Now, their parents think they'll be better off, but they don't, which I think is quite interesting in itself. But I want to make another important point here, which is on the economics. There is no evidence that young people are particularly socialist or particularly left-wing on economics. When you ask young and old people whether or not they're likely to want to pay more for higher taxes, for more public services. You don't see any difference between different age cohorts. Now, neither group is particularly pro-low taxes, and that's a broader issue across demographics, but it's not an issue with young people. Another interesting factor as well is that younger voters are more likely to think it's important to want to own a home than older demographics. They're more likely to want to have that sense of ownership in their lives, perhaps because they don't have access to it. And of course, we know just as a matter of fact that they're not getting access to those homes. Indeed, as well on top of that, and this is where the economic interest the Conservative Party has to think about very carefully, which is that younger people really are pro-house building compared in any kind of meaningful sense, especially compared to older groups. And to the extent to which they are voting in their kind of material sectional interests, there is no particularly good rational reason at the moment for them to want to vote for the Conservative Party in large numbers. And that doesn't mean that the Conservative Party can't possibly win back these voters, but certainly at the last election, it was a go for the core voter strategy that obviously did not prove particularly effective. Now, there's one last point here, though, where I think it is more difficult for the Conservative Party, which is on culture. And things like immigration or LGBT plus rights, you do genuinely see young people are more progressive than older demographics on those issues. And if the perception of the Conservative Party being excessively, socially or culturally conservative can be undermining. I think this is a challenge for the next leader, because you're going to have this issue where you've got a set of more culturally conservative voters, older voters who might be losing to reform, but then on younger voters, you're going to be losing more culturally progressive voters. And how they walk that tightrope and have a broad national appeal, I think, is an open question. But what I'm going to do is conclude by making a point here, which is that whilst right now, today, the Conservatives are not particularly popular amongst young people, nothing is inevitable and guaranteed about that. There was a poll that came out in recent days. It was a Canadian opinion poll, and it suggested that if only 18 to 34-year-olds voted in Canada, the Conservative Party in Canada would get 253 of 338 seats. That, as in, if young people were the only ones voting in Canada today, the Conservatives would win 75% of seats in the Canadian Parliament, which shows you what can happen when you have a Conservative Party that does appeal to those younger voters, a Conservative leader who talks relentlessly and persuasively about housing, Pierre Poilievre, and is able to take a more persuasive message to the next generation.
Good.
Thank you, Tom. We did a similar session at the Emmanuel Centre, was it, a few weeks ago, Reem? And I started my remarks there by saying I'm 32 years old, so 10 years older than Reem. And it's my 8th
You're still young.
It's my yeah, I know. It's my 8th wedding anniversary on Tuesday. Thank you. And indeed. And I said in my remarks that it wasn't just under 25s or under 35s anymore, but it feels like everybody at working age who votes for the Conservative Party came to my wedding 8 years ago. And the reason I repeat that joke is, looking around this room, I think 4 people in this room came to my wedding. Right? So that shows you, obviously, the problem illustrated. So, Andrew touched on this remark, the Churchill remark: if you're not a Liberal at 20, you've got no heart. If you're not a Conservative at 40, you've got no head. And what I would say about that, it's not the fact of actually getting older that makes people Conservatives or historically made them Conservatives. It's the personal growth of living the life well lived, right? Whether that's building a house, starting a family, realising what compound interest does by saving in your pension or in your ISA, getting promoted. And you find, when you do these things, that the facts of life are indeed Conservative. So it's passing through those gateposts and understanding what your parents and grandparents said to you was that you resented maybe when you were a teenager in your 20s are actually really rather true. And what is happening there is that you're building capital. And you're building capital in the kind of IEA economic sense, of course you are. But you're also building social capital, and you're building a stake in society, right? So conservatism in that instance kind of makes sense. But if you don't go through those gateposts in life, you're not going to become a conservative, and you're not going to become a capitalist. So we can't take for granted that people will make that journey towards the Conservative Party if we don't have those rungs of the ladder through those gateposts accessible or perceived to be accessible to local people. We talked a lot about housing. Housing, undoubtedly, in my view, is the primary order issue. If you look at ratios with Western European countries, we're about 4.3 million houses short in this country. the 300,000 houses a year targeted by the government, that's based on immigration assumptions that assume 150,000 immigrants a year, right? So that's out of kilter. And we're only doing 130,000 anyway. So that chasm actually is opening up every year. And as Matthew says, that means the Conservative Party, as it stands, is an electoral demographic cul-de-sac, right? Our voters are literally dying, right? If you just project our voter base that voted for us at the election just gone, 1/6 of them will be expected to die in 5 years' time. That is how bad the demographics our support are. And they're not being replenished as they were in the past. And that's not just a disaster for the party, for us as a Conservative Party in terms of our democratic appeal, but it's disaster in pretty much every policy area that you could fathom to mention for the country, right? If we don't have good jobs in our most productive areas, then the economy's not going to grow. If we want to maintain our current welfare models, health, NHS, pensions, welfare state, and I'm not necessarily sure we do, but anyway, if you do, we have to grow 2.9% every year for the next 20 years, right? We've only done that 2 years in the last 20. If we want to capture the AI industrial revolution, which could transform the 22nd century, we're going to have to build houses near Oxford and Cambridge, perhaps. That might be a good idea, mightn't it? Else the United Kingdom will just miss this boat entirely. So I think housing is a key issue, but what we've not touched on so much is I think marginal rates of tax for professional people. So if you're a young professional who's done the right things, as Matthew described, you've got a student loan, you're paying 40% income tax as a marginal rate, for not earning that much money in the southeast of England. 3% NI employee contribution, is it? 9% student loan. So, an ordinary young professional in the southeast of England pays more of its take-home pay to the government, and that's even before you start making a pension contribution. So it might be taking home 40% of what you earn above, not an incredible threshold. And if you take in what rent is in London, who's building any capital, right? We just aren't. So we have to look at marginal rates of tax on work. And I think we also have to look at policy on family. My wife doesn't work because we've got 2 children. If she went to work after tax, there's no point in her working. If we want 3 children, definitely no points in working, right? We should be deregulating childcare. Just look at, again, ratios in Western Europe. We don't need to do anything crazy libertarian on this. Sorry to IEA, right? But just having ratios of childcare which match not Western European norms would make childcare cheaper. Never mind throwing it the other side of income tax. I just wanted to touch on one more point. Andrew talked about sectarian interests and the Conservative Party. Sure, he's quite right to say we should never chase sectarian interests. We should, serve the country. But there is a tension in the Conservative electoral coalition that's inherent about older people and younger people, and housing is one of these things that touches on that. But I don't think it necessarily has to be. When I talk to my members, and they see me in the early 30s with young children, they often say to me, I wish my kids and grandkids would have children. I want to be a grandparent, a great-grandparent. And I think, actually, that it's changing a little bit. I think older people are realising just how difficult it is for their children and grandchildren. But I think there's also a Conservative answer, right? So what we've done too much of, and the Labour Party has now accelerated this with its changes, is we have littered the countryside with soulless, windowless, car-orientated sprawl, right? And that is what people hate, right? That's what people hate. Those rabbit hutches. And there's a Conservative answer, right? London is half the density of Paris, right? We should densify our cities. And that's what will drive productivity growth, right? It's not new estates in Hampshire, frankly. It is accessibility to the best jobs in, places like London. And we can do that by, going to Mayfair, Kensington-style mansion blocks, Georgian terraces, in a way that I think communities would be much more accepting of. than what we've had in terms of this sprawl. And we can use Scrutonian principles in terms of in Oxfordshire, in Cambridgeshire, we should build a new Cambridge that looks like old Cambridge as opposed to what people are concerned about. And I think if we do that and we come up with these ideas, we can build the houses where they're necessary as opposed to where it's politically advantageous for the Labour Party at this very moment. And we can also empower our economy for the future and win young people back to the Conservatives. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Right, let me just pose a couple of starting questions to our panel for a bit of discussion before we come to the audience, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions from the floor. Both of you, I think, have touched on this point that the Conservative Party, in pursuing the goal of winning back the young, can't afford to become a party that caters to a sectional interest, that you have to have a broad offer that brings people together. Now, I promise not to look backwards too much. I think this should be a forward-looking panel. But it does strike me, and I think it may strike others, that the offer at the 2024 general election was one that was catering to sectional interest, and it was one that was really pandering to an older vote. The relentless rhetoric about Labour's pension tax, which was really Labour failing to correct a Conservative policy of freezing the tax thresholds, and then coming up with a slightly obscure one of a higher personal allowance for pensioners to offset that. But equally, the national service suggestion, so sort of forced labour or at least compulsory volunteering for younger voters at the weekend. I remember I was at someone's 40th birthday party when they said, "Have you seen what they've just announced?" And I thought they were joking. I was completely taken aback, and I said, "Well, there you go. That's it, isn't it?" Now, that seemed to me to be a very cynical attempt to pander to a very particular type of voter. And I'm delighted to hear that you, and it would be crazy, obviously, to try and do that to younger voters as well, given the starting point for the Conservative Party. But to turn this rambling statement into a question, I think what do you see as being the big political challenges that you have to solve to try and have both? Because it does seem to me that on the one hand, there's a kind of a choice here, right? What Jack has just described, and I think what all of our panellists have really been moving towards, is that the Conservative Party has to once again be a party that speaks for the upwardly mobile, that is about dynamism and change, but a positive kind of change, versus a party which is really there to serve the interests of those who've already made it and are quite happy with comfortable stasis. But that does involve a shift, and that may involve upsetting some people. How do you think the future Conservative Party stitches those two things together? Andrew, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, let me answer just a very slightly different question, which is what one would have done with hindsight,
right?
More of to round out that offering. I'm 100% with Reem. The wrong thing to do was both the ban on smoking, because it eschewed in general our lodestone of individual freedom. Yeah. If you fundamentally, and as I say, this is a thought, a philosophy that is much broader than the Conservative Party. If you believe in the state as servant, not master, if you believe that moral good comes from decisions that we make ourselves rather than the state makes for us, then it's really important that you hold true to that lodestone. And there was a particular feature in the way that ban was proposed to have a particular cut-off whereby those who were legislating, almost to a man and woman, would not themselves be subject to that ban. That seemed to me just bad on every level, and that's one of the things that I think one might do differently as one seeks to try and strip some barnacles off the boat and get back to a Conservative retail offering that is broad-based and popular, because that's what we're in the business of doing. Two other things, if I may, that I think would have been good with hindsight to have pursued a little bit more aggressively. One, and Jack's spot on with marginal rates of tax. You know, we believe in this room, because we are here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, in the economic incentives that are important to behaviour. And some of the cliffs on, for example, tax-free childcare, we were quite quick to come forward with spending more of your good money on people's childcare, the state abrogating the responsibility that historically families themselves comported themselves to do. But we only very late in the term started to address the thresholds at which those tax-free childcares was withdrawn. And that was a big issue about in families. You'll be familiar broadly with the issue, won't go in detail, about two families on 49,000 having a very different set of tax outcomes to one earner on 98 or 101,000. I think, and this may inject a tiny spice of controversy among some representatives here, but I think we were very soft on devolution. I think that if we look at the failings of the biggest housing markets, they are almost invariably where there were Labour mayors. Yeah. Right? So the homes we need, the densification that Jack talked about, that I fully support, the homes we need in the places we need are by and large in cities and urban areas. And if you even look at the government's planning proposals now, they're essentially using constant stock growth as the measure. So whatever your existing housing stock in a district is, you'll apply a roughly constant percentage. Now, if you did that in an agrarian age, we would still be living in doomsday-style towns and villages because you wouldn't see the disproportionate level of growth in urbanisation, which was a precursor to the Industrial Revolution and has made London in particular one of the most successful global cities and spawned many industries that drive the prosperity of this nation on the back of that. Professional services, legal, maritime, insurance. These are all really important parts. They're the mitochondria of growing our economy, and without them, we're not able to do that. Almost every university is based in a large city. So the power of cities to generate economic wealth and hitherto to expand both upwards and, to a lesser degree outwards, Jack's absolutely right. London is one of the least dense capital cities on the planet. It has enormous scope. Where exactly one would configure things, it's enormous scope to grow. And yet the impediment to that has not really been some supply-side reform. Right? There's been some other places that have grown even within the existing planning framework. They have been with an excess of socialism. So even when there's really large sites brought forward in London, a mayor has imposed ludicrous social obligations, typically an affordability homes percentage, that has made those sites unviable, and development has therefore not happened. So we believing in the free market, seeking some deregulation, both devolving too much power, because we have a very federated political system now, very different even from when we were last in power, particularly different from when the great Thatcherite supply-side revolution last underpinned the economic growth of this country. We've created not real devolved decision-making, we've just created additional layers. And one of the things that I think the last Conservative government took way too long, particularly given that we actually had a former mayor of London sitting in number 10 Downing Street, we could have been, and we should, if we get back into power again, much more muscular in areas that fail to deliver, that have national importance. We were much too soft on Mayor Khan. It should have been much earlier in our tenure that we stepped in, said, if you are not going to build the homes that the nation needs, we are not going to consign a generation into excessive rents or homelessness. We are going to, as central government, step in and do what central government is doing for the interests of the whole economy. There's more that we could and should have done in terms of access to credit, the post-2008 financial regulatory settlement, which is something I was nut and bolt dismantling as economic secretary. But again, we could have gone much further, much more quickly, because it's not just about access to the form of capital in bricks and mortar. It's also about access to financial capital, the ability to save, to speculate, to take risk. All of those are equally important ladders of opportunity that we Conservatives believe in.
Macy, what do you make of this with your holy hat on, I suppose? And we can talk about the Canadian Conservatives as well, and they've come up, and I think it's an interesting model. So Pierre Poilievre, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, obviously has been very strong on housing. More housing, get young Canadians on the housing ladder. And as I understand it, not as a close observer of Canadian politics, but on the one hand, Canada's a pretty progressive country. I guess their young people are at least as progressive as Brits, if not more so. He seems to be a bit of a culture warrior. And you said there was potentially a kind of a danger there for Conservatives in pursuing the culture war stuff, that they might upset or alienate younger people. It's sort of the same question, but from a different angle. Is it possible to bring these two things together in one political movement?
So I think both major parties have this fundamental structural problem in modern politics, which is we're no longer fighting on the traditional kind of left-right axis in the same way. You now have, at least on kind of economic issues, traditionally everyone, you fought on left-right economic axis, everyone was kind of what we would now consider to be quite conservative. These days you're fighting on two separate axes simultaneously, and you're trying to maintain two potentially very culturally different voter sets, because you're dealing on your economic axis and you're also dealing on your kind of cultural, social axes. The Labour Party have this problem as well. This is what meant that they did very bad at the last election, is on economics especially. They lost in places in the south around London and further along, and then in the north, of course, they lost on culture and Brexit. This election, the Tories got trapped in the same reverse kind of situation, where the Tories managed to kind of annoy everyone a bit. Managed to annoy everyone on economics and culture for variously different reasons. It was a strategy that didn't really please anybody, because everyone could find something to be annoyed about. Plus the general issues of perception of incompetence and not delivering on promises. That all adds up. I think you can try to manage that effectively with young people by appealing very strongly to their economic interests. I think that's what, and then the culture stuff matters a bit less. When you're not appealing at all to their economic interests, and they have absolutely no reason to vote for you, even if you might be perceived to be a little bit more culturally conservative than they might instinctively like, if they have a reason to vote for you on economics, if you're delivering prosperity, if you're delivering housing to them, they might be willing to allow a little bit more cultural conservatism than their instincts might otherwise push them to do so. Another point here, putting on a purely politically hat onto what's been saying here about densifying cities. It's worth noting that from an electoral perspective, it was probably madness for the Tories not to just come in and require a lot of housing in London and around Oxford and Cambridge, because for the most part, I mean, there's some exceptions, obviously, they're not conservative voters. Yeah, and therefore there's a bit of an opportunity there. Now, of course, what is even better from a policy perspective is not using top-down methods, but using bottom-up ones, where you build local community support for more housing and you create incentives for councils to do so. So, letting councils keep more of the uplift value in property prices or business rates or council, whatever else it may be, and encouraging that bottom-up rather than trying to overwrite the evolution altogether. But that's sometimes more difficult, and sometimes you do, because of the nature of the planning systems, you need some top-down force.
I mean, on that point, actually, I didn't know this until very, very recently, that even before the modern planning system was established, councils very frequently did have the power to block development. The difference was, before the Second World War, if they prevented you from developing your land, they had to compensate you for the loss in land value. So that's a pretty significant incentive.
That was
even
in the CapEx report.
Yeah, even in the Foundations report, I think. Even when land was much less expensive. The other thing, as you mentioned, is that local councils, local governments then, they kept all of the revenue that they collected locally themselves. So more development, more residents, very much a boon for local government in those days in a way that really it isn't now. So there's sort of the institutions of the planning system and the regulatory structures, but then maybe also the incentives that we have to deal with here as well.
It's a really good example of that. So one solution, we also obviously can talk about planning regulation and the planning system and the Town and Country Planning Act, but also fiscal decentralisation. If local authorities are required to raise their own revenue and they actually have those budgets themselves, they manage it themselves, they're going to want more taxpayers in their jurisdiction. So if you want those particular authorities to be incentivised to want more taxpayers, to be incentivised to want more house building in those particular areas, you want them to be able to manage their own budgets. And so actually, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that fiscal decentralisation does actually sort of encourage and incentivise more house building for particular local areas. I think one of the biggest problems is actually, we haven't used the term yet on the panel, but the NIMBYs, right? They're not in my backyarders. They do tend to be older, but they are not the majority of the public. And indeed, I don't think they are the majority of older people. Jack mentioned the fact that, when you go back to Windsor, you talk to older people, and actually they want their grandchildren and their children to be able to own homes. It's the fact that a very, very politically active minority of people have effectively been able to sort of pierce the political system and allow for particular members of parliament to effectively cater towards those perverse political incentives. So what we need to do instead is change the structure and actually incentivise those local authorities, incentivise councils to want more taxpayers in their areas, because effectively it means they raise more revenue. I also want to make a very small point. There is a bit of a perception as well that the housing crisis is only cared about by non-homeowners. And I actually think that, so last year at Conservative Party conference, we did a very similar panel trying to discuss why we have this kind of intergenerational inequality. And of course, house building is one element of that and one solution. But also, the housing crisis affects last-time buyers just as much as it affects first-time buyers in many ways. If you're older and your children have left home, and you want to potentially downsize, so we know that a quarter of pensioners are millionaires, but a lot of that money is in assets, right? It's in bricks and mortar, it's in their homes. There is no way that they can actually downsize that particular home and feel wealthier, feel like they've got that money to actually spend, because there is only available housing for them. And Tom mentioned this recently at an IEA event, that in the US they seem to be very, very good at building homes that are catered towards older people. And I think that there is the point to be made that, you know, your last home shouldn't necessarily be your biggest home, but it should be your best home. And so for many, many older people, they're not able to do that. So if we fix the housing crisis and actually reform the planning system, we will not just be helping young people, we will also effectively free up that housing, which of course will help young people, but it will also mean that last-time buyers are in much more comfortable and effectively cater towards them, much more comfortable housing than they otherwise would be.
Jack?
Yeah, Tom. The initial question you posed was, did we pander to sectarian older voters in order to try to survive last time? And we may have had the same practical effect, but I don't think that was a starting point. So, and I think this is what we really need to learn, and I think it hooks into a lot of these themes. I'm a conservative. My parents weren't political, but they had me and my brother young, working class backgrounds, realised they couldn't give me and my brother the opportunities that they wanted for us. My first memories are them going to night school, alternative nights, my father to get his electrical qualifications, my mum accountancy qualifications. They set up a small business. It's small fry to a lot of people in my constituency and most people who are probably members of the Conservative Party, but it gave me and my brother life opportunities that they couldn't dream of, right? And I, very early on in my life, associated that with our values, the Conservative values, that hard work and education, you can improve your life, right? And what they've done in Canada, similar kind of message, right? Even though it's not necessarily progressive, in terms of the culture, what it is, it's about hope and it's about aspiration. It's a positive message that you can do something about your life. And what we did at the last election was right-wing politics became about anger. It became a negative thing, right? So it had, immigration, right? It became a negative thing. Pensions, they're coming after you. It became a negative thing, right? So we were pandering to the worst sides of people as opposed to the positive side of people. And even though I'm not supporting James Cleverly, he talks quite passionately and well about this, right? We need an uplifting Conservative message. And if it's uplifting, you can get round through some people's objections because your head stays different, right? And we can have a conservatism for the whole country where we are collectively moving forward. And I think we can square some of these circles by just being a positive force, right? We want the country to be better. We want the next generation's life to be better. We want everyone's life to be better.
Yeah. I mean, there is something there, right, that at the moment it does feel like how right-wing you are, even how free market you appear, is driven by how angry you sound. Yeah. And that's not necessarily where any political movement wants to be.
That's not a good correlation, is it? Yeah.
On the side of the enraged. All right, let's go to the audience. Let me get a sense first how many people have sort of got questions, and I can work out how to... All right, we've got quite a lot then. Okay, I think this was the first hand up here, a couple in this row. Yeah, go ahead.
Angry. So I'm also a...
I didn't define it. I would not make it awkward.
25 and under, just about.
Right, yeah.
So last week I said goodbye to a colleague of mine who left for Dubai. 2 months before that, one to Singapore. 2 months before that, Singapore again. 3 months before that, New York. Either I'm really unpopular or there is real brain drain going on in this country. For context, I work in financial services, particularly in fintech, and that is something we're supposed to be a leader in. And it scares me how people feel they have to leave this country just to get opportunities. And when I speak to them before they leave, I hear the same things. Like, my public services don't work. I'm getting taxed to oblivion. I can't get a house. It's not safe. I don't want to raise my kids here. So my question for you guys, I suppose, is does the answer for that lie in liberalism, or where is state intervention required?
Brilliant. And should we have the chap next to you as well while we've got the microphone there?
I think we started trying to stand it up now. My question is, since housing's been a big part of this, where I live in Cardiff, they're throwing up blocks of flats in Cardiff Central, right by the train station, loads of them. Problem is you can't buy them, because some guy in an office abroad has bought them all, and is renting them out for, triple what the mortgage should be. So I think the problem is we're not building houses, is you literally cannot buy them. I can buy a house. I wore a uniform, got a military pension, do my job. I can buy a house right now. If I went to go buy it, you can rent it for £1,800 a month, but the mortgage would have been £600 a month. So I think that's the question is, sometimes libertarianism, neoliberalism idea is good, but you can't become a capitalist because some other capitalist doesn't want you to be a capitalist because it's not good for his capitalism. So where is the line? Where is the state the servant in making people capitalists? The state isn't always evil in this. The state can create capitalists, needs to stop capitalists, stopping people becoming capitalists.
That's a good and interesting question. Thank you. Well, let's deal with those two, actually. So we've got the question of brain drain and what's driving that. And then also, I suppose, question about development, but specifically overseas investors buying up housing before Brits get the chance to. Let's see. Jack, why don't we start with you this time?
Right.
Yeah.
So in Windsor, 25% of children go to private school, right? So if 10% are displaced, that has a massive effect on my state schools, and particularly send kids in state schools. So when I make arguments about why this is bad policy, the VAT on school fees, you don't argue about the 7%, you argue about the 93%, right? Because they're going to be the people who are affected the most in reality. And I think the same is true to the first question. As Conservatives, we're never really in a good spot when we're trying to win the public relations battle, talking about young professionals who might be on 2 or 3 times what the average person is in this country, even though it's in everybody's interest. So we have to frame this in ways that people understand. And the NHS is where people understand the argument you've just made, sir, because where this is most acute, I think, is in our doctors and our nurses, right? And you see them going to Australia in many instances, right? So I think that's where we need to make this argument, right? Because that's something that people understand. So I think we need to win that argument in that kind of space, and then it'll have right across our economy, in my opinion. So just politically, that's how I try to frame this, because it is an absolute disaster if we move down that route. The second question, the reason that the thing that's driving this behaviour ultimately is the acute shortage. Right, so I think we have to, before any kind of answer on any of this stuff, right, recognise that is the stuff that drives this. I would probably peel away from some of the more kind of libertarian thinking on this. Most countries do have some kind of restriction on home ownership and things, so I wouldn't be opposed to sensible constraints on that, but I wouldn't want to kind of hit it too much with a big hammer.
Yeah. Matt, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. First of all, answer this essential question about what is a young conservative. I mean, by definition, anyone aged under 50, anyone aged under 65 is probably a younger side conservative, which means a lot of people in this room, myself perhaps included, can self-define. The fundamental reason why people are leaving this country is because Britain is poorer than it should be. And that's because we've had a lack of investment, which has driven down our levels of productivity. It's meant that in order to fund public services for an aging population, we've had to have higher taxes. The reason why we're poorer than we should be is because of ultimately government restrictions on the capacity to invest and to build. We can't build houses, we can't build energy infrastructure, our cost of energy is far too high. We can't build transport infrastructure, so it takes so long to get everything around. We can't live where people are going to be most productive in cities, has already been discussed. And at the same time, the other parts that make Britain a pretty crappy place to live are public services and the failure of the likes of the NHS. So there is a big role for the state to step back, although I don't think we saw that under the Conservative government. We're certainly not going to see that under the Labour government. The second question about house building and particularly that point about foreign ownership, I mean, we have to be absolutely clear here that foreign ownership is not the problem. It's not the reason why Britain has a housing crisis. Only around 1% of houses are bought by foreigners. The issue is the UK hasn't built enough housing for a long period of time. That means we have a lack of stock. That means when we have a growing population and when we have people moving around and getting higher incomes, the house prices go up. To put this in the simplest terms possible, the UK and France, about similar population levels. The UK has 30 million houses, France has 37 million houses. So if we want to be able to solve the housing crisis, blocking foreign ownership might sound nice and be popular. You know, it might be a justifiable thing to do in some circumstances, but it's not going to fix the problem.
The development market actually encourage foreign ownership. And I think it's particularly because the startup costs for any major development and the timeline for bringing this housing on stream is so long and it's so expensive. I think what you hear from kind of big developers, especially for big apartment complexes and stuff in London and other cities, is to make this financially viable, we have to sell everything or a certain percentage of it off plan before it's even built. And I mean, realistically, no young house hunter is going to be buying something off plan that is not going to come on. Some might, but not many, that won't come on stream for several years afterwards with all that uncertainty. Foreign investors will. So I think if we can fix the planning system and the way that things are developed, and so probably we can get more small developments, faster developments which are less costly to those putting them up, this issue might diminish without having to have any kind of heavy-handed intervention there.
Two of those misnomers, I think. The first one is like the second home argument that, people are buying up second homes and that's why we've got a housing shortage. And then the second one is that point that all the foreigners are buying up our houses or our apartments in London and that's why we have a housing shortage. And I think that you've just tackled both of them. I mean, it's just not true. And actually, our colleague, Dr. Christian Niemitz, wrote a very convincing piece in favour of second home ownership and this kind of empty home perspective. Actually, it would be really great if we actually solved the housing crisis and we had that abundant housing market. We probably would see lots of people buying up second homes, and that's great. That's a great thing. That's proof that the housing market is actually abundant and actually been solved. I also think what's interesting about this from a political perspective, so we've got two members of parliament on this panel who are both, very clearly making the argument that we do need more economic growth, and one of the ways to do that is to reform the planning system, and we do need more houses. But the majority of the last 14 years of Conservative government has not seen that. We saw Rishi Sunak, of course, scrap housing targets. Now, again, I mean, your perspective on, a national housing target, that's obviously debatable. We probably wouldn't need it if we actually solved the planning system. But, of course, that is not the case at the moment. I think what's interesting is political incentives do matter. And we've got to ensure that those particular perverse incentives are not capturing the minds of other members of Parliament. And hopefully we can convince your colleagues to be as sound as you guys on housing.
The one thing that just links them both is the excesses of socialism. I mean, there's no question that the housing market, rental, private, is massively overregulated. So all of the issues that, if we applied socialism to the production of bread, we would have exactly the same issues. We'd have the wrong types of loaf produced in the wrong place at the wrong price. There wouldn't be a functioning market. And if you look particularly at the rental market, it's much easier to see the intervention directly in the rental market. The rental market has seen a reduction in supply. Now, those stocks have not been vaporised. You will not have noticed people going around with large wrecking balls, removing physical properties from the market. That is entirely a function of regulation, some advanced by us, now being advanced on steroids by this government, and is simply removing supply into different parts of the market. The reason that too many young people, too many people with capital, almost anybody with a degree of mobility. And remember, we are in a world where many more people have that mobility. Those wretched Zoom calls, the fact that, even 4 decades ago, we were one of very few market economies that were capable of producing very high-end jobs. Now, this is not the world we're in. We're competing, against the G20. The government often frames things against the G7. The G7 is sort of a club of other Western declining economies. The pace car for our economy is the G20. And if you look at fintech, subject I was the minister for, our approach to blockchain technology, crypto assets, whatever one thinks about them, they're a speculative class of investment, is positively Luddite, right? It's been an absolute battle to get to just ground stakes for us. Other economies have moved much faster. It's a classic example where we should, as Conservatives, believe in the maxim of caveat emptor, that you articulate clearly what the risks are, but you then allow people to take risks in an informed way and endure the consequences of that. And that is why we are seeing a brain drain in lots of different other sectors. In things like healthcare, it's about the lack of interfering bureaucracy, allowing people to get on and deliver the best clinical care that they need. That's what people who are clinicians tell me is the attraction of Australia or New Zealand. It's not the weather or anything else in particular, the salaries. It's the greater clinical freedom that they're able to practice. So the linkage between both of those, aptly enough, for an organisation that did profoundly good work ahead of the last radical Conservative government, the one that we want to be the precursor for the next one, is in an excess of socialism, too much regulation, and not enough application of free markets. So I don't think it's about more controls, more regulation. I think it's probably about freeing up markets and letting them do their job.
You at the end? Yeah.
Sean Blackman, I'm a CPF coordinator. My daughter, when she was 19, was doing a politics A-level, and they were asked the question, who's the most popular, the most effective Prime Minister of recent years? I expect them to say someone like Tony Blair or Attlee or someone else. And they said Margaret Thatcher. And they said, even the left-wingers said Margaret Thatcher. So why? What was it about Margaret Thatcher? And they said because she saw what the problem was, believed that she had an answer, had the will to do it, and followed through. She did what she said she was going to do. And when I asked my daughter recently why she voted for another party, she said because the Conservatives didn't do what they said they were going to do, and now Labour's suffering the same fate. So my question to you is, what are you going to do?
All right. And I think just one behind you as well to get... Was there another question there? Yes, you, sir.
Thank you very much. Philip White. So I'm pleased to discover I'm still a young person, but I'm also Deputy Leader of Staffordshire County Council, so a big local authority. And I absolutely agree with something that the panel have touched upon, but I think we could develop more as a party, which is around aspiration. But aspiration is, to me, it's applied ambition. So you actually need to give people the routes to fulfil their goals. And housing's clearly the key. And as Staffordshire, we see a lot of the push from Birmingham, and the growth of Birmingham is a major metropolitan centre, major economic driver in the country. But our view is that at the moment we try and go about furnishing that growth in the wrong way, because what we essentially do is we give our cities carte blanche, and we don't give them too many obligations to go with those freedoms. In housing, a lot of people in Staffordshire will go to school, go to university, go to college, get qualified, and then they will travel into Birmingham to work and travel home again. They actually want to live in Birmingham. Building housing in our cities is the key to deliver what young people want. For older people who were worried about annoying, actually not having that housing delivered where young people don't really want it, with the burden on the infrastructure, is the answer to not alienating either of those constituencies. My question as a Conservative is, could we do that through deregulation? So the national planning policy framework at the moment is a one-size-fits-all affair. Why don't we deregulate in the metropolitan areas? I prefer that to targets, so make it easier to get planning permission in those areas, remove those burdens on developers, and recognise where that demand really comes from younger people without annoying our older voters.
Excellent, excellent. And it strikes me there are 4 questions there around a common theme, actually, right? It's it's delivery and follow through and knowing what you want to achieve
can I
and
talk about
actually how do you do
incentives
it. Sure, yeah.
So, as a member of parliament, Andrew would be the same. If someone wants to build houses in a village, in one of our villages, right? Everybody in the village signs a petition against the housing development, right? So, as a member of parliament, it's really easy to lead that petition, right? And get right on, I'm going to own this issue and get very, not happy residents, but they'll be glad of you, right? But if you do that for every village, then collectively the answer is absolute carnage, right? And that's the problem we've got ourselves into, right? So we need to change, but that is simply politicians operating in their incentives. And anybody from the centre right of economically should understand that people respond to incentives. So we need to change the political incentives, right? So I was a councillor on Royal Windsor Maidenhead, and we did a very local plan, and it was a totally painful process, right? Because we just had to put 25,000 houses somewhere, and wherever you put them, it was grief, right? So you try to hide behind the technocratic nature of it, but fundamentally you just had to make decisions which were politically costly, yeah? So we need to change the political incentives. So the Foundation's report was a good one that talked about that recently. Who was that? Was that
was an independent group.
An independent group, so okay, I want, they talked about community land auctions, for example. So as opposed to us just having to put 2,500 houses here and then just getting the grief of it, the community has sold off the rights to effectively zone that land, and so the local area captured some of the benefit. Now you could do various things with that. That they're the kind of principles where I talk about realigning the incentives of local communities as opposed to the local community just getting the negatives of it. And to this gentleman's point about, well, outside the South East it might not be housing, and then he listed a lot of failures, which were absolutely correct. But the problem there was growth, right? The reason all these public services don't quite work and et cetera, is because we've not grown on a per capita basis in the last, someone help me out, since 2001? Yeah. 2008. So as individuals, per capita basis, we're just the same amount of wealth, but then we've had this demographic change, which is unhelpful. So you've had to spread the butter further, which has just meant it's thinner and thinner and thinner. And then you've got the Treasury trying to mask this with a load of unskilled migration, right? Again, to make the nominal GDP rise in an artificial way. So, and housing unlocks a lot of that growth. So I'd say there are really linked issues. They're not quite as disassociated. We need the economy to grow, and housing is one of the things that will really unlock growth, I think, and that will have beneficial to all the different policy areas that we all care about.
Can I just a slightly more optimistic take on the planning framework? Because in my experience, communities are not NIMBYs. You'll find examples, but by and large, communities consist of grandparents, parents, people who want carers, somebody who cares about the village school and understands that you need affordable housing for the local primary school. So in all of my experience of working with residents on local plans, it is they that can be trusted. And it is incredibly corrosive in the National Planning Policy Framework and others to then disempower those communities who are seeking agency around what they're trying to do with the national planning targets. I think there is absolutely scope to move away from that one-size-fits-all. Things like the duty to collaborate were terrible in terms of relieving urban areas of the ability or the duty to fulfil their own. I talked about devolution. The number of people, because it's not just, it's just NIMBYs. If it was just NIMBYs, you'd find them, sit down, someone as reasonable as Jack would talk them through, and we'd have this sorted out this afternoon. The number of government agencies and different public bodies that are empowered to say no is just myriad and an almost impossible sea of fog to get through. And when you think about that issue about delivery, and fantastic to hear about the story about Mrs. Thatcher and people being such great consciousness, one of the jobs of work for us all, and this is why we don't have very much time to prepare, we've got to get a leader in place, make sure that we're making good use of the talents within the parliamentary party, but get ourselves ready for government. So we go back in on day one with a very clear agenda of reform of all of these different arm's length bodies, these quangos, essentially the Blair settlement, the legal and jurisdictional framework that makes anything that you want to do, from fixing a pothole to building a new urban conurbation in the southeast of England to relieve pressure, almost impossible. And my learning of government over the last 4.5 years is that even when, and it's not easy to get the stars to align, get the Treasury to be supportive, get number 10, and make sure departments are trying to do the right thing, even in those rare moments where you've got that perfect alignment and you're trying to drive something through, the number of agents of the state that are seeking to obfuscate, particularly a centre-right government, but I think this government will very quickly run into the same challenges of delivery as well. We do need to rewire the state. There is a clear failure in there, and the role, the value, Tom, of the IA is in doing that Selsdon-esque work ahead of time, so that when we get back into government, we can productively make good use and solve some of these things that are corrosive, not just to our own electoral prospects, but actually much more worryingly, corrosive to democracy in this country, when there are fewer people now living in under democratic governments as a percentage than there were at the time of my birth, and probably that of anybody in this room, and where we are going to see the resurgence of things like brain drain that are already following the capital flows that are flowing away from this country. So it's a really big existential challenge for us.
So that's after 33 out of 45 years of right-wing Conservative government. So fundamentally, you have overseen that body being that we now live allegedly in a capitalist country with 7 million homes like, and we aren't building.
Well, so restating the problem statement doesn't help us. I'm fully joined up and shoulder to the wheel, as I know Jack is, to actually being part of the solution. There's a lot of work to do to get us to the position that we can repudiate, not so much the Conservative legacy, but particularly the Blairite legacy that let all these sort of traps in place, and that we need to be a lot smarter about how we go back and repeal them.
So we're short on time. I'd like to take a final round of, let's keep them brief questions, and then we'll go along the panel. Everyone will have a chance.
Reem wanted to have it.
The bits they want to. So yes, you sir, gentleman in front of you, and the lady at the back as well.
Fascinating discussion. I'm really enjoying it. I'm one of the old people, probably the oldest in the room. 4 children, 14 grandchildren. Wow, very good story. I went to live in Canada. Imagine Canada many times. I had a top job in Canada. My wife came with me. She got a top job. We earned so much in Canadian dollars that we paid for my parents' mortgage. That was 50 years ago. Think what's happened in 50 years. Think how we've declined in 50 years. Think of all the things that we've done wrong to young people. I didn't pay a penny back to anybody. I got a grant. I worked hard. I knew what it meant to work hard. I worked 84 hours a week when I was 18 to buy my first car. Those days are gone. They're not here. It's about demand and supply. You can't get the supply because you can't get the building companies to build the houses that you need. So you have to reduce the demand. We're an overpopulated country. 2 things I mentioned. I was talking to a Liberal candidate. I said, what do you think the maximum population should be in our country? He said 100 million. Just think about it. Just think about that as an answer. I was talking to Ed Miliband recently. I said, you're not going to build on the Greenbelt, are you? He said, oh, no, definitely not. No, only brownfield sites. Within days of the election, we had greenfield. We had the grey belt, didn't we? Wasn't this the grey belt? None of it adds up at all. It's about demand and supply. We have to reduce the population of the country in a sensible, ordinary way. However, what I would do is I would put you don't start getting pensions until you're 70 with an older population. In terms of where the money's going, if you look at the National Health Service, 7% of GDP about 10 years ago was on the National Health Service. It's now 11%. It's an unsustainable model.
Thank you. And the chap in front of you, please.
Speaking as a young person, the recent reaction to the winter fuel payment being means tested has been extremely disappointing and frustrating, because there is a view amongst many of my friends that I don't hold, but it's the idea of it's socialism for the sort of over 70s, and then for the young people it's unrepentant capitalism. And obviously with the ageing population, things like social care and pensions, it's just fundamentally unstable. And I'm curious to think about how we handle and manage the reaction. I mean, this was, £300 a year, I think it is, of, many of whom are millionaires. And it has been in the papers for weeks. And it's just a bit disheartening about the reforms that we know almost certainly have to be coming. So, yes.
Then just at the back, so will be our last question, and then we'll have final comments from the front.
Thank you. My name's Reva Goody. I'm a GP in West London. I've been a GP for over 25 years. It's not that young, but the great thing is I work with a lot of young people and listen to a lot of young people. I suppose my question is, I recently came across a worrying figure, 846,000 young people from the ages of 16 to 24 are not in education, employment or training. And what's even more worrying is it's what I see in my daily surgeries. So I suppose my question is, on the one hand, I think it is, I certainly feel that the pressures on our young people are huge, certainly pressures that I didn't face, whether it be social media, peer pressure, whatever. But I also think there's a welfare system that's working almost against me, which is why I'm often writing off certificates, medical certificates, when I'm weary of doing so. So I suppose my question is, how do we square that circle? Ultimately, I think our young people have to go through difficult times in life to develop the resilience. And so it's a difficult one. So I'm just wondering whether there are any thoughts from the panel on that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Why don't we start with you, Reem? There's a few things there. I mean, there's a couple of questions about demographics, both in terms of immigration and the ageing population, connects to the fiscal issue. If we're this worried about the winter fuel allowance, how are we going to do something like raise the pension age to 70 or indeed deal with social care, old age, healthcare? I think there's a challenge, maybe particularly for Andrew. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you speak very persuasively about the things that need to be fixed last time. But the gentleman asked, you had 14 years, not you personally, of course, but why are we only talking about this now? And then, yes, the final question. Reem, pick your preferred one. What's wrong with young people?
Well, that is the golden question. I just want to make the point, I think that we need some conviction here. And then it sort of harps back to the gentleman's question about Margaret Thatcher. I'm always very weary to sort of idealise politicians, sorry guys, and also sort of historical figures. We've got to remember that Thatcher wasn't very popular in her first few years in government, and yet she did the things that were unpopular, but were needed to fix broken Britain. I think we need that. This goes back to the point about winter fuel payments. Why on earth are supposedly Conservative members of Parliament opposing the means testing of something that is effectively being taxpayer money being spent on already very, very wealthy people? Why are these supposed Conservatives then opposing that? So we need to, I think, hark back to the question, what does it actually mean to be conservative, but also what does it actually mean to be on the right, and what does it mean to believe in free markets? I think this is why I work at the IEA. We need to make the convincing argument for capitalism, for free markets and for free trade, and ultimately argue that this is the best way to make people better off, but also it is moral that people keep more of what they earn, people are able to get onto the housing ladder, and there are all of those wonderful cultural implications as well. So I think it's more a comms problem in that respect than it is anything else, and we need to have more of that conviction in politics.
All right, Reem, thank you. Matthew?
Thank you very much. So I was at Labour Party conference last week, and I was struck by the number of younger MPs. By younger, I mean kind of millennial generation MPs who you got the sense of a lot like Jack, but in far greater numbers, where they're in their 30s, they've had some kind of successful career, often something in science and tech. And they're the kind of people who actually, in a previous generation, you actually might have expected to sign up as Tories, and yet that's not what they did. They went into the Labour Party. And I think that's just such a warning sign for the Conservative Party. They're not attracting those kind of people, and that those kind of people are not there anymore. On the more positive side, young people aren't necessarily attached to any particular political party like old generations were. They're very happy to change their vote election to election. That's the reason why you see these huge electoral swings. In order to get there, though, it's not going to be, and this is counterintuitive, it's not going to be about saying what is immediately popular. And this goes back to the question about Thatcher from earlier. And Thatcher wasn't particularly popular. She didn't but she decided not to define her agenda by what looked immediately good in opinion polls. Now, Freshwater Strategy, we do a lot of opinion polls, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in politics about what is the purpose of an opinion poll. It's not to ask the public what they want and give it to them. It's to try to understand where they're at and how to communicate with them effectively based upon the ideas you have. And ultimately, that is what the public will want. They want some level of leadership, of taking charge. I think one of the great failures over the last 14 years was that the Conservative Party used polls in that formal way. They did things that appeared to be immediately popular or refused to do things that they might perceive to be unpopular. The amount of times as a think tanker, you could go into a government and speak to a minister and say something, but they'll say something along the lines of, I completely agree with you, but we couldn't possibly do that because it would be too unpopular. Now, where do you get at the end of 14 years? Everyone's a bit pissed at you because the country isn't better off because you haven't made any difficult decisions, because you haven't shown leadership. So if you're using polls and understanding the public in a more effective way, you can talk to them, you can persuade them, you can take leadership, but you've got to be willing to have that level of ambition and not necessarily just go with what is the immediately easy path, because it's not going to work in the long run.
So the real challenge that the gentleman, I think, just behind Christian there, said 33 in the last 45 years, we've been in charge and we've not progressed this quite. The solution, the problems we're articulating here, to solve them is quite a radical agenda. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Andrew has said. What we failed to do in the last 14 years of Conservative government was repeal, effectively, the Blairite constitutional consensus, which has meant that we've been in many respects in office but not in power, and you can point to tons of stuff, right? The Equalities Act, the Human Rights Act, the way judicial review is expanded, the way the Prime Minister has to ask Holak to put people in the House of Lords who elected them. Even our bishops are picked by a panel called the Crown Nominations Commission now, as opposed to the Prime Minister, right? And then you wonder why the bishops are the most left-wing part of the House of Lords. Well, it's because you've just let the blob pick them, right? So this is structural, right? And the first thing we're going to need to do before we do any of this stuff, right, get the country growing, is repeal a lot of it, right? And we're going to need the think tank community to give us the list, right? Call that the Great Reform Act, call it whatever you want. I might call it the Restoration of Parliamentary Sovereignty Act, but we should probably let the comms people decide what it's called, not me.
Sounds a lot like taking back control.
So, yeah, indeed, right? And we need to do that because before we want to get the economy to grow, if we want to change political incentives so we can do this, we're going to have to do that. And part of that actually is going to be the composition of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, right? Because if you wanted to, say, stop the boats, which was the stated aspiration of Rishi Sunak, had something I agree with, the actions that you would need to take to do that, you would rub up against this constitutional consensus. But that's fine, you can pass a notwithstanding bill or leave the ECHR. Well, you couldn't actually with the composition of the Conservative Party at the last election. So it's going to have to change. Now, if you look at the benches behind Sir Keir Starmer, they've gone from 150 to 407, roughly. So he's got to pick 250 of them. We have got that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So just as you talk about the A-list, people talk about the A-list MPs now still influencing the Conservative Party, we have a one-off opportunity to get a radical Conservative government in the next election, but one then that generation of new cohort will echo through the next decades of Conservative politics if we get those things right. So, as we talk about renewal and rejuvenation of our party, there is actually quite a lot that we might be able to achieve because we've had a forest fire, right, at the last election, but forest fires can be regenerative if you make the right decisions, and that's the opportunity.
Very interesting. Very interesting, Andrew.
So let me finish on an optimistic note because I think most of us would agree on the problem statement, and I 100% agree with what Jack's just echoed back. Notwithstanding all of those challenges, we still are one of the world's leading economies. Our financial services are increasingly closing in on the US. I saw in a poll last week as the largest global international capital centre. There's certainly more capital traded through London than there is through New York. Our scientists were the scientists that discovered the vaccine, but more importantly, are the seed of our great life sciences industry. And in AI, which is going to change all of our lives in ways that I would be foolish to predict, we are one of 3 countries in the world, and the only one that punches above its weight in terms of the economy perspective to the US and China, that's up there as an absolute base in AI. And we're holding our head up high in terms of our impact on the world stage under multiple governments through things like what we're doing in Ukraine, but also the very significant commitments to the security of the world more generally. So there is a lot to play for. Now, the gap between the reality that we don't like today, the very articulately portrayed world in which things just don't work, and you know what, if the whole party had stood for election, I fear they may have walked it. I don't know if that's everybody's experience. The gap between where you are today and the gap and where you want to be is simple, and it's leadership. And whilst I don't venerate any one individual, although the sainted lady comes pretty close, there were a number of architects of that successful resolution that came out largely of the IEA and others, but they were the architects that did the work in those quiet years between 74's defeat and 79's victory. My own personal political hero is Lord David Young, God rest his soul. He was, like me, a businessman that entered government, sought to try and make a difference. His particular difference and focus is important in government was both on the economy, but also in something called the Young Enterprise Scheme that no one here is possibly old enough to remember, but spawned a generation, unleashed a generation of young entrepreneurs, some of whom went to form and become some of the very biggest and most successful companies in the UK. So it can be done. There is work to be done. We do need honest conversations. It's one reason, not a plug, but it's one reason why, having looked at all of the candidates carefully, we've got a strong field. I'm supporting Kemi because I think she's the one that will have the most honest conversations. We don't have time to lose on that because over the next year, we need to have that, agree what we need to change, and then start building a party. And I'd love Jack to be in charge of candidates. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Start building a party that is capable of picking up the baton and leading this country exactly where it needs to be. So the IEA is central to that. And all of you here, because there ain't a great many of us these days, all of you here have an incredibly important role.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.